Thank you, friends, for reconvening. I still see half a dozen people hovering around the coffee, but we'll begin. The purpose of this last segment of our time together is to gather from you thoughts and ideas about the Bill of Rights project so that we can pass these along to the NACRA board as it moves toward finalizing the Bill of Rights. Your comments can cover a number of things. You've seen the draft Bill of Rights. You've seen the feedback, a summary of the feedback that has come from around the nation. You can make a comment on the feedback. You can make a comment on the draft. You can make a comment on whether you think the Bill of Rights is necessary or useful or not. You can make a comment on the possible use of the Bill of Rights, and you can make comments on tone or substance. So anything really is useful for a comment that we will make note of and pass along to the NACRA board as it works toward finalizing the document in May. Jack Shell has a microphone, so if you want to speak, if you raise your hand and wait for the microphone, because we want this to be a dialogue, and so we want everyone to hear everyone else. So we're about to begin, and we see 2 hands, and 3 hands, okay, 4 hands, 3 hands.
I'm sorry. I just have a point of clarity. Where can we see or find the summary?
Oh, I'm sorry. I announced that people who didn't have it should come to me and get it before the coffee break, so that they could cram during the coffee break.
I thought that was the original.
No, sorry. It was the original. It was the original plus the commentary. That's what it was. So if you've seen the original, you can comment. Comment anyway. You don't have to know what you're talking about. If you'll excuse me, I'm trying to find something to write notes on because I'm going to want to be taking notes. So, Jack, you will give. I'm going to get one. Fine. That's oh, fine. Great. Save time.
I have one connected comment. George High from Western. The work you're doing on it is just great. I do think it's important to come to a conclusion and establish what we're doing, and then giving us opportunities in the different states to try to accomplish what we want to accomplish. And the work on this has been just grand. I like the Bill of Rights as it is written. It's my difficulty with it. It is awfully long, and I'm very much troubled in number 4, where we talk about 20% of the governing board should be residents, because I think that large figure is going to be very threatening to management and will delay, very likely delay for a long period of time any approach that we want. The summary, I think, is what comes from our place, so I guess that's why I would be in favor of it. But I think it's very helpful because it simply says 1 or more residents on the board of directors. And I think, where we have difficulty with managements, that's a way to start. We have a problem in our own community. We do have a resident representative on the board. We're lucky enough by chance to have 2. But ultimately, the present representative was not chosen by our executive, by our residence council, which was all right, but not. It was appointed by the manager, executive director, and we hope that will be corrected in due course. But I mean, she's all right, but it isn't the way other people. I end my comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
I second his comment.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Okay, we'll go over here, and then we'll let the microphone go over to this side of the room.
In Virginia, the state.
I'm sorry, I should have asked that people state their name and their state.
My name is Roy Ritchie. I'm from Westminster.
Great.
I'm Secretary of State.
Thank you.
In Virginia, the State Insurance Commission does have a written, very explicit Bill of Rights. It's already in place. The one thing it does not have is membership on a corporate board of any type. My thought is it would be much easier to work with something that's already in place, make a few changes, because the senator just got done telling us to put anything new in Virginia is very difficult. So I think we might have a heads up there that we can work around this. Thank you.
Excellent. Jack, if you'll go around to this side, there are two hands over here, and then we'll go in the back over there. So come down to the front first.
Okay. Who is it?
I'm Joan Lewis. I am president of our chapter at Goodwin House, and I'm senior vice president of that for Virginia. We do have a voting resident on our board of trustees, and the board of trustees and management thought that that resident should go through the normal voting vetting process of any member on the board of trustees. And our voting, and that happened. Our resident council got nominations from anybody. You can self-nominate, and then resident council sent up a few names to our board of trustees, and it went through their governance, all of the interview processes. So our resident voting member feels on an equal status with all the other members of the board of trustees. She thinks that's very important.
We wish that that's what we had.
Would you mind saying
Oh, I'm
again?
sorry, Frank Little from Verizon House in Seattle. On the last comment, one of the things that we are working through as we redraft the Bill of Rights is specifically to get the residents elected rather than coming from the nomination by the CEO, which is more typical of any corporation. We have 3 supposed residents on the board. They are clearly instructed not to be representing the residents, but their only responsibility is to their other board members and to the goodness of the corporation, which means that they don't communicate with us on board activities or anything else of that nature. This is one of the things that has driven us to writing the Bill of Rights. I think one of the things we would say is that the Bill of Rights that we have used has been yours from NACRA. It has caused us to be able to get 40 members of NACRA at Verizon House. It's gotten, they have completed one at Emerald Heights, which is Redmond across the lake from us. They were able to get almost 80 members of NACRA. They've gone through 9 revisions of the Bill of Rights that they started with the NACRA Bill of Rights. Theirs has been finally published. Ours will be published within the next 30 days. It's a wonderful resource, and we used it as a resource, and we are currently using it as one of the resources as we look to trying to get state legislation. So I think what we see in the Bill of Rights that you're drafting is it's a resource for people like ourselves. Without it, we would have no place to start. So it's very important to us.
Thank you. Jack, there's a hand in the back.
Bob Angus, Ingleside at Rock Creek, Washington, D.C. We're part of a 3-part community of King Farm, Ingleside at King Farm in Maryland, and Westminster in Virginia. Early on, we encouraged our board of directors to have a representative on the board of trustees, and this has been going on for 50 years now. King Farm isn't that old, but since they started, it happened also. And the president of the association was a member of the board. Now the board of directors has rewritten their bylaws, and they have, in the new bylaws, included a representative from each of the 3 organizations that are on the board. This is prior to our Bill of Rights here, which is encouraging. Unfortunately, the representative from King Farm and from Westminster Lake Ridge are appointed by the executive director. But in the DC, because the DC code specifically requires that the every CCRC have a representative on the board from the Residents Association. We elect our own representative with no restrictions. The representative represents the residents and is on a 3-year term, eligible for re-election, and just as equal to any other board member, and this is true from each of our 3 communities in terms of the way they serve. When we got the Bill of Rights, we did make some revisions. One of them in particular was to change that number from 30 to 1 representative, or 20, I guess, to 1 from each organization. But, of course, we already had that. There were some other few changes, and when we finished that, we presented it to the Residents Association, and they voted to ratify that. I guess prior to that, we had taken it to our executive director and showed it to her, and asked if she had any comments or questions, and she read it through, and she said, "Looks fine to me." and so that's the way it is with us, and I'm hopeful that other residents associations will be able to do that also. Fortunately, we do have some protection in the District of Columbia because we do actually have a law on the DC books that was actually written by one of our members many years ago. So, thank you.
Jack, there's a, oh, I'm sorry, this right here, and then we'll come down to Walt. Okay, please go
I
ahead.
am the resident representative of the board of directors, and the board has found that having a resident on each standing committee is of great value because of their different perspectives. And so we residents, 2 of us have to be on 2 separate committees as well as the boards because they want a resident perspective on every standing committee.
We'll come down here to Walt, and then we'll go over here.
I'm Walt Boyer from Deerfield in Nashville, North Carolina, and I'd like to speak about Deerfield and about North Carolina as well. At Deerfield, when I came there 10 years ago, there were no residents on the board of directors. We were able to convince the management and the board that they, president of the Residents Association could be a member of the board. Initially, he was, or she was, a non-voting member of the board. Eventually became a voting member of the board with all rights. The president of the Residents Association was intended to be, to represent the residents and provide a report at each meeting on issues and concerns of the Residents Association. Later on, we were able to convince them to add a second member, a resident member, who was vetted as earlier reported as full member, as full vetting in the matter of all board members at Deerfield. And that person is expected to act as a board member and not necessarily as a representative of the residents. I've served in both of those positions, and I felt it was very successful. We've had as many as 3 residents on our board when someone on the board actually enters Deerfield. In the state of North Carolina, we have had a program of moral suasion going on for about 4 years now to increase the number of CCRCs with members of the board, I should say residents on the board of directors. When we started that program, the number of CCRCs with which we had membership in North Carolina Continuing Care Resident Association was about 15%. Our latest tally last summer showed that we had broken through the 50% point. So moral persuasion has worked pretty well for us in increasing that number. And we intend to continue to pursue that as a means of getting residents on boards of directors.
Excellent, thank you. Why don't we just pass it to Bill, and then we'll go to other people.
Just a minor correction to the comment about Ingleside King Farm being nominated by the executive director. That isn't actually the way it happens. The residents vote for their nominee to go on the board. The top 3 vote getters are passed on to the board as potential board members, and the final choice is made by the nominating committee on behalf of the board. Up to date, they have always taken the person with the highest number of votes. The guy who's just resigning is a financier from the World Bank, and therefore when he drops out as being our board member, he's been encouraged by the board to remain as a member of the Finance Committee. So it is a very democratic process. It's not completely democratic, in the board have the final say of which of the 3 elected are chosen. But we're quite happy with the way it happens.
Well, I see 2 hands. Since the microphone is here, we'll go here. But I saw the hand there first.
Yeah, we're talking about membership on the board, but you know, if you go into healthcare at Westminster Canterbury, you have handed to you your rights. My impression is that all nursing homes are required to give people who are coming in a copy of the rights that they can expect to exercise as patients in the nursing home, whether it's a CCRC nursing home or any other kind. That this is this a national requirement, or is it?
I see people saying yes. Okay.
That's just for nursing homes, it does not,
Right.
not for independent living.
So we want to bring the
I
microphone.
have the opportunity of having the microphone right next to me. If you go into our CCRC, we're in a 7-story building. The 7th floor is the nursing home part. As you come out of the elevator on the 7th floor, there is the Bill of Rights on the wall right in front of you.
Well, would you just pass that back that way? Thank you.
You're hearing a lot.
Would you mind saying your name and?
Absolutely, you're hearing a lot from Virginia, and I'm Barbara Hildenbrand from Williamsburg, Virginia, and yours your name. My question about these model laws. There is no corresponding national force to push that we, an authorizing body. So what you're saying is each state, once these are passed by you, each state then is on their own to get it through. Do we also have the freedom then to pick and choose
Yes.
which model rights we might want to emphasize in a given legislative term?
Yes. The goal of NACRA is to offer a series of best practices or a model Bill of Rights, but we're assuming that local people may want to modify, as we've actually heard has happened.
Yeah.
So there's no legislation involved here from NACRA. We are just offering something that is suggestive, and we're assuming that local people will adjust it to their own circumstances. And we even heard, if there's a Bill of Rights already in effect in a state, and there's one provision missing, that state may just borrow that provision, even modifying that provision. So there could be all kinds of uses for it.
Were you asking about model laws or strictly local?
Well, both, really.
There are 2 thoughts on that. Number one, the Bill of Rights, which you've seen in the nursing home, was enacted by federal law in the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1987. You remember that was the way Reagan got legislation. And so that was included there, and that would be one approach. It's an imperfect approach. There have been some challenges with that nursing home approach. The model laws that we're talking about would probably go through the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. That association has as members the The 50 insurance commissioners of the 50 states, plus the 5 territorial jurisdictions, plus the commissioner of the District of Columbia. Those are the members. They are supported by their staff. The staff are not members. When they adopt a model law, it's typically considered technical, and it's enacted into law in every state. So, for example, in the state of Virginia, which is not the most friendly state to regulation, you have the standard valuation law, you have the standard non-forfeiture law, you have the Virginia Life and Guarantee Association, which protects people from loss if they're policyholders. Those are all laws that were enacted through the NAIC and were never controversial in the state and were simply went into law.
I hope it'll be helpful if I just clarify that NACRA has 2 projects that we're talking about. Jack has just addressed the Model Laws Project, which deals with the financial and insurance aspects of CCRCs and analogizes them, the CCRCs, to the insurance industry. The NACRA also has a Bill of Rights, which is a model Bill of Rights, which addresses both financial and non-financial matters, and that is not related to the NAIC.
Can I assume that the model laws have been sent to the national AIC or not?
And that's an interesting question, Jack. Does the NAIC know about our NACRA's model laws? No, that's right. Take your time. We have time. We don't want you to fall off.
Being in the back of the room, I know it's hard to hear without the microphone, so I have to come back here. Yes, they do know about it. No, the providers don't like it. The providers have been able to block any efforts for the NAIC to take this up. However, I did talk with Senator Rexner, for example, urging her that they could simply get a resolution through Virginia directing the Commissioner of Insurance to have the NAIC take up the technical matter. You might even just start with a guarantee. Why not have a guarantee for your entry fee? Good heavens, if you put your life savings at risk, shouldn't you have the same security as somebody who buys a small life insurance policy? There's no reason not to include it. The mechanisms are all there. So, but up to date, the industry does not want to be regulated for good reason. The nonprofit model means that many of these communities are undercapitalized because they don't have access to the equity markets. And so the industry has a challenge. So if the industry were to embrace this, there would have to be some kind of reformation, and nobody likes to have to change things that they've built their career in.
Could I ask one more question? Of all the states here, have any of you tried to address these issues through your Office of Consumer Affairs?
Anybody? Did people hear the question? Has anyone tried to address these various issues through the Office of Consumer Affairs in your state? Well, that's something we can think about. Thank you. Okay. First from the back and then George.
This is going, I'm Thelma Mrazek from Knollwood Retirement Community in the district. This is going back a way, but as to organization and the way residents have become involved in the management and the running of the organization. Thanks to Ingleside, we have had a resident on our board of directors for some time. We've gone even further than that now, in that the board of directors has established standing committees, House Committee, Buildings and Grounds, Health Services, etc. And those committees have residents sitting on them with a management person and a board representative listening in. So those standing committees have input constantly to the board of directors and the operations of the facility.
Thank you. Yes, George, Jack, George, hi, you're in front.
Quick observation, but for clarification. When we've heard an occasional negative comment on the idea of residents being on the board, we've heard the claim that either in DC or in Maryland, the resident representative apparently became very ill and had to be removed, replaced, I don't know, whatever the complicated things, as if healthy members of a board of directors couldn't have the same sort of problem. But I mean, do you really want to pick one of these elderly folk to be at your board?
Right.
Just a question, that is the truth.
I don't, Jennifer, you wanted to say something?
When the topic changes, so go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was going to say something, and then I'll turn to you, Jennifer. If I've been trying not to say anything because I was anxious to collect thoughts. In terms of the number of residents on the boards, the draft does have the 20% number, and I have to admit that the 20% suggestion, and I have to admit that has produced a lot of reaction, that it seems too specific or too much or too little. Or, there are some too littles also. That's problematic. I'm going to have to think about that. The only thought I personally have about this, and this is not a macro thought, it's just my own thought, is that when a resident goes on a board of 15 people who may include lawyers and bankers and CPAs and things like that, I mean, some residents are quite used to that because they've been on boards all their lives and have dealt with it, but some residents could be overwhelmed. And the idea of having more than one resident on the board both gives a chance for a diversity of resident points of view to be heard, but also there's a supportive function that residents, can maybe not be quite overwhelmed. I know in a different field, in the affirmative action field, often putting so-called a token person in a body can leave the token person feeling quite isolated and overwhelmed. So that's just a thought I want to offer. And the other thought I'd like to offer on the matter of selection, I've heard several things here which sounded similar to what happens at my community in Penswood Village, where a confidential nominating process of the residents, not an open election, but a confidential nominating process by the residents, comes up with 3 candidates, and then a confidential process by the board's nominating committee picks one of them. I've been living there for 6 years, and my experience is that this process manages inevitably to be sure that the king picks the loser of the election every time. And so it's really, and what has happened, and there's no other person from Penswood Village here, so I'll speak freely, but what tends to happen is that the person who's selected is very, very nice. Someone who no one would want to question as their integrity or their sweetness, but there is no backbone. And I think residents who are alert to the situation don't feel represented. That's just, my perspective on a community experience. Jennifer, you wanted to speak. We can change the topic about your initiative.
Okay, my name is Jennifer Young. I'm from Meadow Lake, which is in Tyler, Texas, part of the Sears Methodist Retirement System that's in Chapter 11. And had I learned something in time to make a suggestion, I would have said it so it could go in. But something came to my attention about a sale of Sears Methodist property that had nothing to do with the bankruptcy and actually was an event prior to. So my suggestion would be where we mention full disclosure on significant issues, including financial security, that you be explicit and say also provisions of a sale, just in case any kind of CCRC, whether it's healthy or distressed, if it gets sold, the residents see what will happen to their contracts.
Thank you. It's still time to give such suggestions, so that's very good. Thank you. Connie.
Another new suggestion. We at the Horizon House in Seattle, I'm Connie Hillier, by the way, we added a couple of provisions to your already long Bill of Rights. One was that the management should respect and follow the expressed wishes of residents as to their end-of-life care. And if the resident is not confident, then of their designated representative. And the other one, because we are one of the, I think, 2 or 3 death with dignity states, that the residents' wishes in that respect be followed according to the procedures in the law.
Thank you.
Oh, I should add too that Frank mentioned that we have worked out of Bill of Rights, are working out of Bill of Rights at Horizon House and Emerald Heights in Seattle. As you mentioned before, worked for a long time on theirs, but working on a good Bill of Rights and getting it accepted by the board is something else we had. We got brushed off and told, and the same thing happened at Emerald Heights, which makes you think the managements are talking to each other, and their language is very similar. We were told, oh, hold off, you don't need to do anything. Leading Age is working on a Bill of Rights. And what we got was the Leading Age draft, which was primarily about disclosing what they were already doing anyway. It was not the same age law.
There are, in New Jersey, where they did get the Bill of Rights passed, that the Orange, the Residents Association there, was conscientious enough to 3 or 4 years later conduct a survey to see if the legislation was being adhered to, and found, not surprisingly, that it was almost as if the legislation had not been passed because there was no enforcement arm or no branch of the government that was charged with seeing that the law was enacted. So that's only getting the law enacted is only a first step. However, having the law in the books does give the residents some clout. Even if there's no enforcement, they can at least point to the law and threaten to sue if that's necessary once the law is in place. So it still is good to have the law. The other thing that happened in New Jersey is that the law provides that the board of directors should meet with residents 4 times a year. And one CCRC tried to meet this test by having 4 wine and cheese parties in which, you know, the board members and the residents kind of floated around, and there was no opportunity for any coherent, really, discussion of issues. So there are various ways that people can circumvent laws, and you have to just sort of be on your toes and realize that the struggle may be a fairly long one. Well, yes, I think that maybe we can have 2 or 3 more comments, and we may be approaching adjournment, but I see someone back there.
Yes, my name is Paige Hawk. I'm at Ingleside at Rock Creek. And I just wanted to add that we added 2 items to our Bill of Rights. One was that residents should be involved in the final versions of the budget. And the other was that residents would be included in interviewing senior staff before they were hired. We thought that would be problematic, but our executive director said that was fine, and she's going by the new rule.
Good, thank you. Good suggestion. Okay, I see that Jean wants to say something, and then I'm ready to ask if we're ready to adjourn.
In response to Barbara Hildenbrand's question, back in 2006, Westminster Canterbury dropped a critical phrase from our contract. The people who came in after 2006 and the people who came in before have, a phrase missing. And the phrase had to do with nursing services. It said that Westminster Canterbury would include all nursing services in your monthly fee, except for excessive use. And they would charge a fee for excessive use. That was the phrase that was dropped. And they came out with a schedule of fees, so they started charging for everything. I contacted the Attorney General's Division of Consumer Affairs, and I gave them a copy of that section of the contract, of each of the contracts, and nothing ever came of it.
Okay, thank you. Good. Well, friends, this has been very helpful. I've been taking copious notes. I will bring it back to the board. Those of you who are members of NACRA will have a report on the final results. In Lifeline, we will give a report, and we will make available to you a copy of the final Bill of Rights, which then you can use in your states as you see fit. Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon, and thank you very much for bringing your thoughts on the Bill of Rights to us. It's been really valuable.
Dan?
Yes.
New member applications for NACRA are being accepted at the door.
Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being with us. Yes.